Do you enjoy minion builds and are you looking for a league starter that is genuinely affordable, easy to get going and smooth to play? Allow me to introduce you to a classic revamped Soulwrest Phantasm, a build that was recently buffed and can now scale to tackle most endgame content. In this guide, I will show you my preferred version as an occultist, featuring explosions that will help you blast through all kinds of league content, including Keepers of the Flame, of course. Let's dive in. Welcome to Up to 64-Bit's sister channel, 64-Bit Meta. This is the place where I post videos about ARPGs and similar games. Today we have our very first video, which is for my favorite league starter of all time, Soulwrest Phantasm. This summoner build is easy to get going, affordable, and thanks to some buffs in 3.26, can now scale to tackle most content in the game. The only exception being maybe tier 17s, maybe some uber bosses, more in terms of survivability rather than damage. Speaking of damage, with this build you can expect about 1 million bossing DPS entering early maps. You can scale that to like 12 to 15 million with the proper investments. If you're interested in playing, there is a TLDW right after this section that explains the build in less than 1 minute. And if you want to know more, obviously you can skip through the various sections in the video talking about the various aspects of the build and why I prefer it on an occultist. Well, Profane Bloom explosions. So without further ado, I'd say let's get into it. We are utilizing Soulwrest, a staff that allows us to summon phantasms, minions that fire spell projectiles. We convert their damage from physical to cold, and we scale spell and cold damage with a ton of auras. The most important support gem for the build is Summon Phantasm support, which ups our minion limit to 22. We automate the summoning with a Cyclone Castwell channeling setup with Desecrate and Flesh Offering, and thanks to the Stampede, we don't suffer a movement speed penalty on Cyclone. Now, in terms of defenses, we are looking at practically being capped on block and spell block with 4k life and 1.9k ES, which we recover on block, and we also recover life and ES thanks to Feast of Flesh, and our energy shield is recharged and constantly regenning thanks to Devouring Diadem and also Occultist's Val Bastion. And because we are an Occultist, we also enjoy Profane Bloom. And that is the build in a nutshell. First up, we need to talk about the Soulwrest unique, the phantasms it summons, and how they interact with us as an occultist, specifically, of course, with Profane Bloom. So, let's say that you reach maps and you want to obtain this item. That is usually doable within the first day of a league start. Now, if you are very fast at leveling with any minion build of your choosing, then there is a possibility that this item is either not yet available, or when it is, it might be in the more expensive phase, if you will. With that said, I typically haven't had to pay more than 20 chaos for this item, and in 3.26 it only cost me like 10 chaos, I believe. So this is a very easy to obtain, affordable item after half a day to an entire league day, if you will. Now, typically I would start on a Friday evening in EU time, and then by the time I would get to maps, which is usually the day after usually a 10 to 11 hour campaign, I would be able to pick this item up, especially with the currency exchange nowadays. As soon as I would get to maps, or even sometimes before maps, I would just exchange and go from there. Now, once you obtain this, your first priority is to, of course, try and six-socket it. And that's the beautiful part. This is a skill coming from a weapon, which means that we only need to support the weapon and we don't need to six-link anything. Hence why the build is affordable as a minion build, because you don't have that upfront cost of trying to six-link something. With that said, there is still some cost associated with six-socketing it, and specifically coloring it correctly, because you need that 4 blue and 2 green layout, which is a bit tricky. And you can easily spend 100 to maybe 200 chromes, depending on how good or bad your RNG is. Trust me, I've been through that. Now, let's say that you get at least 5 sockets on there. At that point, you're looking for 3 blue and 2 green, and otherwise, ideally, 4 blue, 2 green. Now, The first support gem you want to slot in is a level 21 specifically summoned Phantasm as soon as possible, because that's the one that gives you 1 additional max Phantasm, raising your total from 11 to 22, literally doubling the amount of minions we have. So this one is a no-brainer. Next up, we have some very typical damage supports, which includes Predator support to direct our damage with Signal Prey. And then we are looking at Controlled Destruction and Minion damage. And Awakened Controlled Destruction is a very nice upgrade, because we unnerve enemies on hit with this, which is another 10% increased damage taken overall. Now, important to note, of course, is that this gives us less critical strike chance on the Phantasms. The Phantasms that we go with are not being crit scaled, whether it's by themselves or with the help of Spectres or anything. This is just a direct damage scaling that we're doing. And there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that when we mention Profane Bloom in just a bit. Now, then we have minion damage support. The awakened minion damage gives the most damage for a gem like this. With that said, the +1 to level that's on there doesn't do anything for us, because it doesn't give us an extra level on the skill on the weapon. Now, most importantly, next to Summoned Phantasm support is the 2 green supports, which is first up, Faster Projectiles, and secondly, Pierce. Faster Projectiles makes it so that the physical spell projectiles coming from the Phantasms travel farther, which means you can hit targets from further away, which is really nice, of course, and it also allows you to trigger Profane Bloom from further away. This one is also a no-brainer for that quality of life. Can you technically play without this? Yes, but having the minions attack from farther away and having them hit targets and trigger Profane Bloom is also an indirect source of survivability. You want to kill stuff or hit or reach stuff before it can potentially get to you. Now, combined with Pierce, that means that we can target rares and other monsters inside of packs. And it also makes Profane Bloom on the Occultist very reliable, because we want to hit into a pack, and then that pack will very reliably explode if they're cursed with our Blasphemy setup. And that's the thing, Profane Bloom is a typical explosion that will scale based on the damage scaling on the Phantasms, because they're the ones triggering it. So sources of increased and more minion damage actually also scale this particular explosion damage. And that is why we are not speccing into crits, and that is why we're not dealing with too many temporary damage buffs, because we want it to be very consistent and blow up packs every single time that we have the Phantasms fire into packs of monsters. So, let's say that you've got all that set up, right? The 6-socket, the colors correctly, the support gems. What is your next step as soon as possible when you're into mapping? Well, get yourself a Triad Grip. Minimum 3 green sockets, otherwise 4. Why green? Because we want to convert from physical to cold. Cold still being the best element to scale, especially with Hatred, of course, as our aura. And we'll talk more about the auras in just a bit in the following sections, but this is a very important piece to have. And this is also a very affordable item. And let's say that you obtain one or manage to craft one with 3 green sockets. How do you get to that 4th green without spending dozens of chromes? Well, you can use the Jeweler's Orb trick on the crafting bench. So let's say that you have 3 sockets on it. And what you can do is simply select 4 sockets to add a 4th, which has a chance of being green. If it doesn't hit green, you go back to 3, and you craft 4 sockets again, and you keep repeating that until you hit your desired socket color. This is a great way to save chromatic orbs and reliably get the right color socket. And this trick goes for any gear piece, of course, that you want a specific socket color on. Now, once you've had the Triad Grip setup, you can look into a Victorious Influence ASAP as well, because the generosity and reservation efficiency on this makes it possible to run a whole bunch of auras as soon as you get into mapping. All you need is 1 reservation efficiency jewel with reservation efficiency for Zealotry, Haste, or Hatred, specifically Haste or Hatred initially. And then you can slot in your Hatred, your Blasphemy setup, your Haste, and your Purity of Elements right at the start of mapping. And again, I'll talk more about the auras and the PoBing and so stuff later on. But this is your initial set of goals once you reach maps. Obtain the Soul Rest, socket it and color it correctly, Get yourself a Triad Grip and Victario's Influence. Usually you can do that while you're also purchasing the Soulwrest, depending on your currency. But with the currency exchange, you should be able to just quickly make some money and go from there. So that is it. Let's move on to the next sections where we talk about the other gear pieces and the things you want to get into place. So let's go. Next up are the supporting skills and items to get the build fully functional. Let's talk about the automation of the Phantasm summoning, which happens when we consume corpses, which is done through a very typical Cyclone, Castspell Channeling, Desecrate, Flesh Offering setup. As we're cycloning around, we're leaving behind corpses, which are consumed, which summon our Phantasms. It's that simple. Now, what's great about this is that we combine it with the Stampede, so we don't suffer the movement speed penalty from Cyclone. Important to note is that Flesh Offering needs to come after Desecrate. So Desecrate gets triggered first. In other words, the corpses get placed first, and then we trigger Flesh Offering. Now, this also means, because we are always triggering Flesh Offering, that means we're always using a minion skill recently, which means that the benefit on Ghastly Eye Jewels is always up. And because we are also always consuming corpses recently, we regenerate 5% of life per second coming from Soulwrest itself. All of this comes together to get that automated, smooth feel in the build. Now, speaking of mobility, because we're using Stampede, we also have the cooldown recovery rate of travel skills, which means that Second Wind Dash is a wonderful setup, and we don't need Flame Dash for that high mobility. You can still slot in an emergency Flame Dash if needed, but yeah, we need to fill up the green sockets that we have on Triad's Grip, hence why I went with Dash Second Wind instead of Flame Dash. Now, in terms of utility, in regards to Triad's Grip, Convocation will be turned into a white gem in 3.27, which means we can take this and slot it into the Triad's Grip instead of something like a portal. And if you were to drop Steel Skin and Automation, you could have another free link setup for something. There is a new skill that creates a wall where projectiles get reflected on, and that might be an interesting thing for the Phantasms, something I'm definitely going to try. But there is some wiggle room in 3.27 with the gem setup, which is rather nice. Now, to round it all out, in terms of the gem sockets that we have, we are using Sniper's Mark as a supporting second curse to further scale our damage, because yeah, we have +1 curse on the Occultist, of course, so Sniper's Mark is a no-brainer to increase the projectile damage that enemies take. In terms of everything else, I think that's pretty much it for the utility and mobility, in other words, the supporting skills. Let's move on to the next chapter where we talk about survivability and sustain. Let's dive into the survivability and sustain for this particular summoner build. And yeah, summoners tend to be on the squishier side, depending on the build that you play. This one is, in my opinion, in just the right spot, in just the right ways. And that is thanks to practically being capped on block and spell block. Combined with 4k life and 1.9k ES, we can survive a lot of continuous hits and the occasional big hit depending on what it is, with physical being the only issue. You know, let's face it, that's always kind of a thing. But yes, we sustain that life in ES through our recovery on block with the staff mastery, because yeah, we are running a staff, so this is a wonderful mastery to utilize. We also recover energy shields with Val Bastion 100 per second, and we also recover energy shield and life in between when Feast of Flesh triggers. And this has saved me a lot in 3.26. You would just randomly go around, you would get hit hard, and then, especially if you're lucky, within a second, boom, it goes back up and you're good again, which is rather nice. Now, we are also constantly recharging energy shield thanks to Diadem. So we're looking at, yeah, 362 recharge rate plus 100 energy shield regen per second from Valbastion results in almost 25% of energy shield being regen per second. So even if you get hit hard, you can dash away and you'll be back up within a couple seconds. Faster even, depending on, which is just rather nice. Now, because we are speccing into spell block, Valbastion also gives us a bunch of extra energy shield, 484 to be precise. All in all, it comes together rather nicely, with the final bonus being that we cannot be stunned while we have energy shield, which is practically all the time. So the Mind Over Matter Eldritch Battery setup is something that really works to further take our otherwise poor life pool and actually make it work in that sense. Now, of course, there are other things we have to keep in mind, because if you look at my chaos resistance, it is currently at minus 25, which is not the greatest. Now, this is the best I could do with the setup that we have, because I put in so many uniques. If you were to take something else than All's Uprising, for example, and just grab a rare amulet, that wouldn't be a thing, but this is how I was able to squeeze in so much damage in the end into the build. Now, we do have Chaos Res on our Amethyst ring here, which is basically the only way you're going to get some Chaos Res. But not to worry, we are also running an Amethyst Flask with immunity to poison. We also combine that with the Soul of Shakari for reduced chaos damage taken and reduced chaos damage over time taken while on Acoustic Ground. All in all, poison and chaos damage over time were not really an issue for me in 3.26, and I don't necessarily expect that to change. So in terms of Chaos Res, even though it's low, I don't think it's necessarily an issue. Now, speaking of resistances, let's talk about Purity of Elements. This is such a wonderful thing to slot in, not just because we need it because we have so many uniques, but also because it gives us immunity to all elemental ailments, which I love. But keep in mind, it's not just for us, it's also for our minions, because the Phantasms are damageable. And while we do solve that with Blessed Rebirth, something we'll talk about when we discuss the whole skill tree, having this for your minions as well, and also for your Animate Guardian later on, is just incredibly nice. So this is a huge source of direct and indirect survivability for both yourself and your minions, which makes it absolutely worth it to run. Now, on top of that, we have a Steel Skin with automation. This guard skill you could technically drop if you want to make room, something I discussed in the previous section, but it is rather nice and it can prevent the occasional one-shot or just keep you alive overall. Now, next to that, we have Flesh and Stone to have enemies do 20% less damage to us when they're close. This all comes together in just the right way to make it all work. Could you slot in more survivability? Yes, you could maybe look at a determination setup. You could look at a rare body armor with armor on it. You could still go with Mind Over Matter Eldritch Battery, but you could spec more into armor. You could drop the Hungry Loop. And instead of the Animated Guardian, you could then just run a second rare. And then you could get some more Chaos Res. You can get Endurance charges plus minimum Endurance charges. There are ways to incorporate more damage reduction and more survivability into the build. But being practically capped on block and spell block, this is what makes it so completely survivable and doable. And in 3.26, it was not often that I would die. And if I died, it was some combination of ridiculous map mods or a boss that would clap my cheeks with immense physical damage. So, yeah. That is the survivability and sustain in a nutshell. So, let's move on. Alright, let's get into the nitty-gritty regarding damage scaling. And for that purpose, I have set up 3 stages of the build that you may find yourself with. The first one for initial mapping. The first couple of tiers of mapping, depending on the currency and availability of some items, but you should find yourself with these baseline pieces kind of no matter what. Now, for that purpose, I have set up a 6-socket Soulwrest with level 19 no quality gems, looking at 771,000 bossing damage right now. That is also made possible due to a 4-socket setup with Hatred, Frostbite Blasphemy, and Haste in our Victorious Influence. And we have a Triad Grip with only 3 green sockets, not 4. So again, a very realistic overview. Now, this is on a level 72 skill tree with 3 out of 4 ascendancy notables. If you get the 4th one, you're looking at more damage, obviously. And for our survivability purposes, we have specced towards and into Eldritch Battery, and we are combining that with Mind Over Matter. And on this particular skill tree, we are practically capped on block and spell block, and we have that recovery of energy shield and life on block as well. So not just damage scaling that we're talking about real quick, also just an overall overview. And don't worry, this particular version of the POB I will also link in the description on top of the main one, of course. But yeah, this is just meant to give you an idea of what the initial mapping might look like in terms of damage and survivability. And yeah, slotting in any rares here will fix your res, will fix your attributes, anything that you need, because keep in mind, we do need a lot of dexterity in this build, hence why we're running a careful planning even early on, and that shouldn't be expensive for that matter. So this is just for that purpose. Let's move on real quick to the later stages. Okay, then we have the build in a much later stage, the one you may find yourself with in the end, before you make the most significant upgrades to the build. Right now, we're looking at about 6.1 million bossing DPS, which is respectable in its own right. And that is with pretty much all the uniques in place, right? So that's with the diadem in place, with All's Uprising in place. This is typically the most expensive piece. Also depending on jewels, of course, because you also want to get a Darkness Enthroned in there with increased effect of Socketed Abyss jewels and some really good Ghastly Eye jewels. Now, to be fair, getting jewels this good early on is going to be tricky. So again, this is more like what the build might look like later on, like a day or two in, or maybe 3 or 4 days in, depending on your speed, and getting a lot of the pieces in place. But can we take this damage further? Yes, we can. And that is, first of all, by getting awakened supports instead of the normal ones. So we go from 6.1 million to 6.6 million with level 5 awakened supports. But Controlled Destruction, the awakened version, gives us Unnerve on hit. And that means we go to 7.1 million, which is rather nice. So that is one of the first priorities, getting awakened Controlled Destruction in there and awakened minion damage as that nice little extra oomph. Now, if you want to take it even further, that is where you start using the Hungry Loop with Animate Guardian. I will talk about Animate Guardian specifically after this section, like the gear pieces that you want, yada, yada, yada. But as soon as we get ourselves an Animate Guardian, on bosses, when all the buffs are active and everything's aligned, we go from 7.1 million. Oh, just a second. It's a bit laggy. There we go. We go from 7.1 million to 9.6 right off the bat. But we now also benefit from Feeding Frenzy, and we expose to cold, which means we go up to 11.9 million. Now, if we then activate Val Haste, we go up to 14.5 temporarily, and otherwise we're looking at a sustained roughly 12 million bossing DPS in the absolute best version that I could and can come up with for now, which is great. This is, practically speaking, 3 to 4 times the damage output I would have before the buffs in 3.26. And after having played and pushed it to its limits with this conversion and this damage scaling, this is the best damage I could come up with. But yeah, the set pieces for damage scaling are, of course, Darkness Enthroned with really good jewels, getting really good cluster jewels as well. So this is a pretty insane one with Call to the Slaughter and 3% increased attack and cast speeds and 35% increased effect. So each node gives us 3.4% damage. That's pretty tasty. Now, then we have Blessed Rebirth and Life from Death and some mana reservation efficiency here. This is something, I talked about in the initial mapping version. And yeah, that's pretty much it. This is a level 95 tree. And this is what it will look like. So in terms of survivability, from early mapping until now, you're looking at the same block, you're looking at the same Mind Over Matter, Eldritch Battery, and Recovery setup. And we just invest heavily into several uniques, including All's Uprising, to get all the mana reservation that we need and all the damage that we need. And the mana reservation, of course, is a huge thing to slot in Flesh and Stone additionally, and to slot in Zealotry on top of the initial setup of Hatred, Frostbite, Blasphemy, and Haste. So yeah, that's the damage scaling in a nutshell. Let's move on to the Animate Guardian and its specifics. Okay, let's talk about how to get Animate Guardian into the build. Because we are socket starved, as per usual for summoners, we kinda have to use a hungry loop. The one that I set up has Feeding Frenzy and Elemental Army in it for damage scaling purposes, and it also has Meat Shield and Minion Life for survivability purposes. A beautiful blend of the two, and with the changes in 3.26, where Animate Guardians no longer drop their gear on death, we don't have to overly spec into innate survivability, especially because our Animate Guardian recovers life continuously, thanks to the medium cluster setup from life from death. Minions recover 4% of life on minion death, so every time we resummon the Phantasms, our minions recover life. I basically only saw my Animate Guardian die once, and that was due to an insane combination of map mods, Shaper influence, explosions, nuclear bombs, you get it. So it's incredibly rare for it to die. With that said, that was with this gear setup, that's not even best in slot. If you want, you can run a Gruff Calls, which is best in slot for survivability, but this is a very expensive item, where I think it was around 7 to 8 div minimum when I started playing initially, and I was like, yeah, you know what? I'll do a Belly of the Beast instead. So, for the most part, these are very affordable items. Dying Breath, Leercast, Belly, rare gloves with Life and Chaos Res, and then last but not least is a Legacy of Fury. This can cost half a div to a div, depending. This one is really good for damage scaling. Nearby enemies are scorched. Yeah, it works well. This is pretty much up all the time on bosses, and it's a wonderful way to scale the damage further, as we just demonstrated earlier with the damage scaling part of the video. So this is how to get Animate Guardian up and running. If you want, you can drop Legacy of Fury, or in that sense, replace it for a bunch of rare boots first. If you want the best in slot survivability, Gruffgal's Pelt is your friend, but get ready to crack that wallet. So that's the Animate Guardian in a nutshell. Let's move on to the next section. We're nearing the end of the video, but there's one more topic we can discuss, and that is the skill tree by itself, and some alternative choices perhaps, like the Necromancer. What would that look like? First of all, this is my level 95 tree from 3.26, and it pretty much speaks for itself. It's a typical layout where, in this case, because we want to cap our block, we go towards several staff block and just generic block nodes, and along the way we grab, in this case, the Mana Mastery for my Reservation Efficiency, Life, Damage, Life, Efficiency, Damage, you name it. There are some masteries to mention, of course. The typical plus 30 Life Mastery. There is the 15% increase to maximum Life Mastery, because we are running a Victorious Influence, so this is totally a thing. Minion Offense, as in the penetration on cursed enemies. Really nice, big damage node. Then there's the Staff Mastery here for some energy shields, and the Staff Mastery here for recovery on block. Fundamental, of course. Yeah, the one big thing to talk about is, of course, the Cluster Jewel setup. This is the best in slot version. The cheaper one has 2% and 25% instead of the 3 and 35 on the modifiers. Yeah, you can try to get one with 12 passives. You can also get one with 8 passives, so you can spend those skill points elsewhere. But yeah, these are quite efficient in terms of damage nodes. Overall, the most important setup is Blessed Rebirth and Life from Death on a medium cluster. This combination specifically is an expensive one. Could be half a div up to 2 div depending. But Blessed Rebirth is mandatory to make the build work properly and smoothly against powerful bosses. Otherwise, the minions will die as soon as they're created. Now, to further augment the minion survivability, you have Life from Death. Minions recover life on minion death. This also works for the Animate Guardian. And every single time you resummon our Phantasms, all of our minions effectively recover 20% of their life, because we resummon 5 Phantasms every time. That's great to keep the Animate Guardian going, and is why, like I mentioned earlier, it's rare for the Animate Guardian to die unless it gets hit by a nuclear bomb effectively. Now, last but certainly not least, the small cluster. This one has some attributes on it, just so I could cap out my attribute requirements. And this one has the modifier for Zealotry mana reservation efficiency. You can also grab the one with the one for haste or hatred, and you would still be able to slot in all the auras with sufficient reservation efficiency. So again, it mostly speaks for itself. And in terms of ascendancy choice, yeah, Val Bastion speaks for itself. Energy shield regen, stun immunity, energy shield gained through chance to block spell damage, generic damage through Void Beacon. The reduced life regeneration rate can be useful sometimes, I won't deny, but it's not mandatory. Profane Bloom, explosions, come on. And then, of course, +1 curse through Unholy Authority. Yeah, but what would a Necromancer version look like that uses Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh to still get Profane Bloom in the builds? Well, let's swap on over, right? To a Necromancer tree, Necromancer skills, Necromancer items, and the Necromancer config. That, right off the bat, raises the damage from 14.5 to 15.7. Not as much as you might think or initially expect. And that is because of some nerfs to Necro. If we're talking like 10 to 15 patches ago when I played this build, the Necro version was significantly stronger for a single target specifically. This was also back before we had Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame, so you really had to choose between either the single target potential of Necro back then, or the clear speed with the Profane Bloom on the Occultist. Now you can get the best of both worlds, of course, with a Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame, and we still grab our +1 curse with an impossible escape on Chaos Inoculation to grab Whispers of Doom. Alright, but is this worth it? I would have to say no, because it's insanely expensive. The damage single target wise doesn't go up that much. We lose 700 energy shield. Our energy shield regen overall is also worse. It's just, yeah, there is some wiggle room. Like, because of the Unholy Might and the conversion, we were able to drop Triad Grip and put in a Grip of the Council. You could drop this instead and just get in a generic rare pair of gloves. There is some more wiggle room. Maybe there's some more damage to squeeze out of it. I only did like a quick Fury crafting on the Necromancer version. But all in all, I don't think it's worth it. It costs too much to get it up and running. If you want to do it, by all means, and give me a report. But yeah, I think the Occultist version by itself, and also for Keepers of the Flame specifically, is the absolute best way to go, because you want that clear speed, and it's a much more affordable version. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's move on to the summary and final thoughts. We're at the end of the video, so that means we have to tackle the summary and some final thoughts. Before that though, if you want to watch me play this build live, I will be on the Up to 64-bit channel all weekend long with live streams starting on the League launch itself to enjoy this build for a second time in a row. I enjoyed this massively in 3.26 after the quite substantial buffs, and it now finally has the potential to not just be a decent League starter, but a build that can actually scale to tackle most content in the game. And yeah, that's kind of it. This is affordable, easy to get going, it's smooth, it has automation, and it features explosions. Is this the strongest or most powerful build or even minion build out there? No, but it's fun. And I think that matters too, especially for something like Keepers of the Flame or other League mechanics where you benefit from explosions like Blight. This is a wonderful way to play a Summoner, alternatively a wonderful way to play Occultist with Profane Bloom. And you can take the principles that I've shown here today and apply it to a Spectre setup instead if you want. For example, you can run Spectres, you could also run Spiders. With a setup like this on an Occultist and benefit from explosions. With that said, Profane Bloom doesn't really go that well with damage over time builds, so that's something to keep in mind, hence why I went with the cold conversion for that matter. But yeah, if there's anything I missed or if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below in the comments. You can also, of course, poke me during my live streams, and everything will be linked in the description. in terms of channels, path of building, anything else that I can think of. So yeah, for that matter, thank you so much for watching my very first build guide. I expect to do more of these. I expect to do maybe some small video updates in between. We'll see how things go. In any case, I hope to see you this weekend, and otherwise, until next time.